But this new news about this new, previously undisclosed, unreported subpoena for the Trump campaign chairman, this new news that we're breaking right now, this breaks tonight, I'm fully cognizant, against the backdrop of this much bigger New York Times story that relates to James Comey. You know, when James Comey was hired to be the FBI director by the Obama administration, there was some political controversy about his hiring. I mean, FBI director is a big deal, right? 10-year term. That's why it's such a big deal that Trump fired him, you know, only a few years into that term. But there was controversy when Obama hired him in the first place. There was controversy on the left. Because number one, James Comey is thought to be a Republican. Number two, James Comey had served in a high-ranking position. He'd been Deputy Attorney General in the George W. Bush Justice Department. And that was at a time when the George W. Bush Justice Department was implicated in having given legal cover to the Bush administration's policy of torturing terrorism suspects. Right? I mean, on paper, that makes somebody with a resume like James Comey not a likely candidate to be given a big promotion to a high-profile job in any Democratic administration, let alone the Obama administration. On paper, it didn't much make sense that the Obama administration would hire somebody from the George W. Bush Justice Department to come run the FBI. On paper, it didn't make sense, but in real life, you know what? James Comey was able to tell a dramatic story of him standing up to the George W. Bush administration when that administration had tried to pressure the Justice Department on a controversial surveillance measure. He gave that dramatic testimony in Congress, and nobody who heard it ever forgot it. So he had that going for him. And he had one other ace up his sleeve. It was a memo. Yes, James Comey had been in on the Bush-era Justice Department decisions on torture. But on May 31st, 2005, after participating in a Justice Department meeting about the legality of torture, James Comey committed to writing. In the immediate aftermath of that meeting, he committed to writing. He wrote down, he documented for the record that at that meeting, he'd explained to the Attorney General that what they were deciding there about torture was wrong. He wrote, quote, "In stark terms, I explained to him what this would look like someday and what it would mean for the president and the government." He wrote this memo after the meeting that he'd participated in. He emailed this memo to his chief of staff, basically memorializing for the record that he was against this decision, that he expressed at the time that a case could be made that some of this stuff they were authorizing, quote, was simply awful. And so when there was a Department of Justice investigation later on into how it came to be that the Justice Department's lawyers under George W. Bush had stretched the law beyond recognition to authorize torture, part of what they had to review, part of what was in the record, was this James Comey memo. James Comey's contemporaneous memo stating for the record that he was against what was going on at the time. And however that makes you feel about James Comey and his participation in torture-related discussions and the Obama administration's decision to bring him on as the FBI director, whatever makes you think about that. That anecdote, that known thing about his past, does go some distance to proving that James Comey has a history of documenting controversial meetings and conversations with hires-up, documenting them in writing at the time, in case he ever needs to get that stuff on the historical record. He's apparently been doing that for years. He apparently did that with the Attorney General back when he was Deputy Attorney General. And now, according to the New York Times, he's been doing that after every conversation and phone call that he has with the president. And so tonight, there's the headline. Comey memo says Trump asked him to end Flynn investigation. And if Michael Schmidt's reporting is right in the New York Times tonight, and these two people who read the Comey memo are telling the truth, then there is, once again, a bombshell, contemporaneously written James Comey memo about a meeting he was in with somebody well up the food chain from him, a meeting that he thinks went dramatically wrong. And he felt the need to write it down and document it at the time. If that memo accurately documents the fact that the president told the FBI director to shut down the FBI investigation into the National Security Advisor over his connections with Russia, if that really happened, then this is heading toward the end, right? It has to be, right? And it feels that way, but let's make sure we've got this story exactly right. Joining us now is Michael Schmidt, the New York Times reporter who broke this story tonight. Mr. Schmidt, congratulations on this scoop. Thank you for being here to help us understand it.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, let me just ask if, in the way that I characterized your story here, did I get anything wrong there, or is there anything important that I missed?
No, you accurately describe it.
Okay. I obviously won't ask you to talk about your sources, but can you tell us a little bit about how you came to know about this memo, how you came to believe that it was contemporaneously written and that it does say what you describe it saying?
In the past few days, I learned that Comey had created these memos about every phone conversation and every meeting that he had with the president. And in the course of reporting that out and trying to prepare a story just simply on that fact, I learned details about one of those memos, and probably what are the most explosive details. Although I don't know the contents of every other memo, my guess is that this is probably the most explosive and salacious stuff in it. Basically, after this meeting at the White House, Comey was very concerned. He was very concerned about a lot of things Trump had done, and he knew that he had to create this record if there was ever an issue. They weren't really sure how to deal with what the president did, but they knew that if they wrote it down, that it would pay off in the future.
Michael, do you know, and I ask this because of that historical example that I gave about James Comey and this memo a decade ago when the discussions were happening in the Justice Department under George W. Bush about the legality of torture. We know from actually New York Times reporting about that experience that Comey not only contemporaneously documented those meetings where those controversial decisions were made and where he stood in relation to those controversial decisions, we know that he emailed them at the time to his chief of staff, to one of his top staffers. Do we know how this information was handled in the moment as Comey was repeatedly making these memos and notes every time he spoke with Trump?
Well, I know that there are copies of them that have been circulated at the FBI, and those copies still exist there. Some of the memos are actually classified and have been logged on the FBI's classified system. So the idea was to spread this out to Comey's, very close advisors at the Bureau. So there were other folks that knew about them at the time. And Comey told folks that he was writing them, and he put his initials at the bottom of them. And this is actually something I didn't know a lot about Comey. I've only covered him in recent years. But in the past few days, I even talked to some folks who said, he didn't really do this at the beginning of his career. But when he came to Washington, like he did as a deputy attorney general under President Bush, he began doing memos like this. He did things like this during the Clinton email investigation, and he did them now. Whenever he was going into something that could be politically sensitive, he did this to document it.
And Michael, just to be clear, I think you explained this, but let me just underscore it. When he made this memo at the time, he circulated it at the time, or he only circulated it?
No, I believe he circulated at the time. I don't know exactly where these memos are in the FBI system or whatever, but I know that they were circulated to his folks at the time, and stuff was logged in the FBI system. There's something called 302s, which are FBI agent reports. These are not those, but these are more memos saying, look, on this day, I went to the White House. This is what happened. Here's the story, JBC at the bottom.
In terms of your access to this information, you write in the Times tonight that you didn't actually see the full memo. You say that your sources read parts of the memo to you. Do you have any sense of why they'd be comfortable reading you parts of the memo but not showing it to you, or if they have any plans to release this document either to Congress or to the public more completely, other than reading you pieces of it?
I don't know why we haven't been able to see, copies of the documents. People can get skittish about meeting with us. People can get skittish about talking to us. And so I don't have an answer to that. But what I do know is that, well, my guess is that Comey would probably give these without question to Capitol Hill if they are subpoenaed, or if Comey is subpoenaed to testify. You know, Comey has taken a lot of criticism. A lot of people take issue with things that he's done from the left and the right and inside the Justice Department, inside the FBI. But if we know anything about Comey, it's that he prides his independence and he prides his transparency. So my guess is that at some point, whether it's in the next few days, months, or years, we will probably see these memos.
Michael, one last question for you. When you brought this to the White House to get comment from them, comment, confirmation, denial, can I ask about how they reacted? They've obviously pushed back on your report since it was published on the Times website this afternoon. They've said that this is not an accurate account of that conversation between Comey and Trump, and that he doesn't want to shut down this investigation and never tried to. Does that comport with how they reacted when you brought this to them for comment? Did they seem surprised that a memo like this might exist?
Well, the only thing that we really knew at the time was that we were one of the few people that were onto this, and that we were the only people that were asking the White House about it. I wouldn't want to get into what the back and forth was with them but you know, as they did deny it. And one White House official said to me that we should point out the fact that the Deputy FBI Director McCabe did testify when he was up on Capitol Hill last week that there had been no, problems with the White House meddling in the investigation. So that's something that we don't quite understand why McCabe would say that, given what happened with Comey. But as the story goes forward, there's a lot of things that we don't know, but we do feel confident in the information that we published and in the fact that these memos do exist.
Michael Schmidt of the New York Times, who is the sole byline on this incredible bombshell tonight. I feel like I'm overusing the word bombshell, but they just keep going off. Mr. Schmidt, congratulations on the scoop. Thank you for helping us understand it.
Thanks for having me.
All right. One of the things that...
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.